My name is Richard Ferrer, and I can say I am cloud hired.
That yes, come and join and get cloud hired. I'm cloud hired.
I'm cloud hired.
I'm cloud hired.
Hey, Go Cloud Architect family. I'm cloud hired.
I'm cloud hired, guys.
So I'll just say I'm cloud hired.
I'm cloud hired.
I'm cloud hired thanks to Go Cloud Architects.
It worked for me, and now I'm cloud hired. Because of Go Cloud Architect program, I am cloud hired. See!
I am cloud hired. Thank you, Mike and the GloCloud team.
Welcome, everyone. This is Mike Gibbs, and today we're here to answer any questions you may have on becoming a cloud architect, or honestly, any other architect for that matter. Maybe you're curious, what does a cloud architect do, or what are the skills you need to become a cloud architect, or what does it take to stand out on your resume to be hired as a cloud architect? That's why we're here today. So you can come, you can ask questions, and I can help you build your career. I remember what it was like for me starting a little over 25 years ago, before I started my first architecture role. And I remember I just didn't know where to go. I was learning the wrong things. And then I finally figured out, or actually I was told exactly what to learn. I learned it. And then immediately I had a great career. I got my first job as a senior engineer. 3 months later, I was a lead architect on that team. 2 years later, I was a principal solutions architect. And you can too, if you know the right direction to go and know where to focus your energy. And that is why I'm here. So bring me your questions on how to become a cloud architect, or what do we do, or what are the cloud architect skills? And we'll do anything we can to help you get your first cloud architect job. So before we begin, I wanted to tell you about some things we have going on, and they're all free. We have a security architect webinar tomorrow, and we're going to discuss how to become a security architect. We will discuss the skills needed to become a security architect. And I'm sorry, it's Thursday, not tomorrow. And but we at 1 p.m. Eastern, and we will discuss what we do as security architects, the skills you need, how to get hired as a security architect, how to stand out, and it's completely free. And because that free webinar is on Zoom, you can ask me any questions real time and my team real time, and we'll answer them live real time for you. So please join me in the free security architect webinar on Thursday. I also want to let you know that we've got a lot of free guides in the description of this video. For example, we have free guides on how to become a cloud architect. We've got free guides on winning the interview, because I want all of you to get hired for that first cloud architect job that you actually desire. And there's a lot of free resources. So check some of them out there in the description of this video. I also wanted to let you know that we are going to be running a 5-week completely free cybersecurity fundamentals bootcamp. And I'll be teaching the program, and it'll be live and free on Zoom, so we can have full conversations, have a real educational experience. You can ask me questions, and that's coming up, so you can register for that. My team is dropping the link to that in the chat boxes. Should also be in the description of this video. So at this point, if you have some questions, bring them to me, because I really want to do anything I can to assist you in building your technology career, or your architecture career specifically. So from my team, were any of the questions back there? Yeah. From Adam123. Hi, Mike. You enjoyed today's video on stakeholder management. What other skills would you say are related and relevant for architects? What a great question, Adam. So the key here to remember is that architecture, and whether it's solutions architecture, cloud architecture, or enterprise architecture, architecture is both an art and a science. Now, I will tell you, early in your career, most people focus on the science of their career, the technology that they're looking at, the hard skills. But the reality is, it is an art and a science. And let me talk about where architecture is an art. And then I'll talk about where it becomes a science. And if you understand that, it'll make sense. And then I'll tie the skills back into those things. So the art of architecture is knowing which questions to ask, when to ask these questions, and how to ask the questions. That's art. And if you get that wrong, you're not going to get any information from the clients. And if you do, it's not going to be the right information. And if you don't have the right information, your architecture will fail. So that's key to know. And that's going to be, it's called eliciting information. And that's a critical communication skill for architects. Now, another critical skill for the enterprise architect, cloud architect, all architects is the ability to tell a story. For you to translate a very complex architecture into a compelling vision that will inspire those executives to take action and do something. The biggest part of our job, most architects would say, is actually stakeholder management. In fact, approximately 50% of your time in any real architectural role will be spent with stakeholders, business stakeholders, technology stakeholders, what have you. And keep that in the back of your mind. So stakeholder management is about 50% of the job. Now, that's going to take a lot of skills like executive presence. It's going to take a whole lot of emotional intelligence. It's going to take executive communication skills to communicate with the executive stakeholders. Now, a lot of what we would be doing is balancing trade-offs in any architecture. So option A is good. Option B is good. Option A has these strengths, but these serious deficits. Option B has these strengths, but these significant deficits. After we figure out what's right for our organization. And that's a very human thing. So that's going to be a lot of analytical skills to really create that kind of matrix that you're going to use, a scoring formula, what have you. Now, I'm going to call it design thinking. But what I mean by that is instead of thinking how to do what we need to today, we have to think of how do we plan for the future. So that takes a lot that goes into planning. Now, one of the biggest skill deficits that keeps people from getting architect jobs is something called executive presence, which is the ability to walk in, command the room, and be taken seriously by the C-suite and the board. To communicate with strategy and clarity and confidence to impact the C-suite. So that's called executive presence and CXO relevance. Those two skills are going to be really critical. Now, there's also the science of architecture. And the science of architecture is also going to be some business skills, and it's also going to be some tech skills. So let me kind of give you a little bit of what I mean by that. Somewhere along the line, Adam 1, 2, 3, we're going to have to create a business case for any cloud architecture or enterprise architecture. What's in the business? When will the business get paid back? What's the ROI for the business? So when we think about hard skills for an architect, where the science piece is, that's actually going in there and building ROI models and knowing how to calculate a total cost of ownership or calculate risk like annual loss expectancy, what have you. So that's going to be the quantum side. It's another hard skill. And then a hard skill, of course, would obviously be, knowledge of network architectures and security architectures and AI architectures and cloud architectures, what have you. So there's the science side of it. So part of our job, the science side, could be crafting reference architecture patterns. What would a demilitarized zone look like? Or what would this thing look like? So when we think about that, and that's really what I want you to think about, architecture is both an art and a science. Now, early in your architecture career, it's more science because the junior level architect jobs, like the solutions architect jobs, 40% of the things could be technical. And the other 60% could be is business. Now, the 40% that's technical is usually not touch the technology. It's usually design the technology, even for the solutions architect. And then once we get in bigger roles, like a cloud architect, it could be 75% business and 25% tech, because we're talking multi-cloud architects now running with all the systems for basically everything. And then we start moving into enterprise architecture roles, and they become about 90% business and 10 to maybe 10, maybe max 20% tech. So you start to see that as you move up, it becomes more of the art, and that's more of the business skills. Great question, Adam 1, 2, 3. Excellent question. please, if you have questions, bring in some questions. We really want to help you grow in your career. We can only do that if we know what questions you're asking, and I really do want to help. Chris, you can bring in the next one. Flying Kites. Hi, Mike. How in depth do you need to know Python and coding if you want to be a security architect? Flying Kites, if you're learning Python or coding, you're never going to become a security architect. And here's why. Architecture is about designing. Engineering is about doing. So if I were to ask most of the architects that I know, none of them would know how to code. So I'm not concerned about your knowing how to code. Flying Kites, I don't care if you know how to configure a firewall either, because none of those things are going to be part of your job. I care that you know how to do security architect things, which is how to design a security strategy for an organization to protect them from harm. And realistically speaking, there's going to be 2 sets of skills that you actually need. And come to tomorrow night's free How to Become a Security Architect webinar, and I'll dive deep into these. But the key is, as an architect, you're not going to be allowed to touch the customer's technology. I'm going to say that again, Flying Kites. You're not going to be allowed to touch the customer's technology. That means you will not be allowed to touch the firewalls or the systems or write code. It's not part of our job. So what's the flow of a general architecture? What's the flow of a security architecture? Well, it's very similar to this in every client I've ever worked with in the last 25 years, and this is what most frameworks want you to follow as well. So if we look at an organization, the first thing we kind of need to do, and it's slightly different for a security architect, and I'll talk to you where the differences are. So this is normal architect, like a cloud architect or an enterprise architect. But in any case, as a security architect, we still need to meet with the executive sponsor first. And they're going to be the person that's sponsoring the project. They've got the ability to say yes and say no, have budget, not budget. So you first have to meet with them. And then you have to determine what they're trying to achieve or what they're trying to do. For example, if a company wants to open up a new store in Greece, I'm from Greece, that sounds like a fun idea. So they want to open up a new store in Greece. We need to know they're going to do that, because we can't, from a security perspective, block Greece from an IP address block perspective or things like that. So we need to know where the company is going, because it's going to have a big impact. Now, we still, in the beginning, need to determine what's in scope as security architects. Are we securing the entire thing? Or are we just coming up with the security for a single DMZ or just customer IAM? What's in scope, for example, this project? Usually it's going to be many things, but we have to determine what's in scope. We then need to determine what the business requirements are, because we can't in any way make sure that our security architecture damages that. And then we're going to have to identify the stakeholders that are going to be part of our architecture, people that have a stake in the business, people that can say no, and we need to support their needs inside of the business with our security architecture. Now, right up at this phase right now, while we're meeting with the executive sponsors and some key stakeholders, which is somewhere in between here for a security architect, now we need to determine what those assets the organization has. What are the value of the assets to that organization? How valuable are those assets? And what is the risk to those assets? We then need to be able to look at the organization's data architecture, application architecture, technology architecture. And we also need to look at what the actual solutions architecture is. For example, if the technology architecture is 2 cloud providers and 1,000 virtual machines in each, the solutions architecture would tell you whether it's it's on the Google Cloud, which is compute engine instances for the virtual machines. On Azure, they're called Azure virtual machines. So we're mapping them down to that. Then typically we need to plan a migration, whatever kind of migration is that we're planning, to go from where we are to where we go. We will typically set up a governance structure. They will typically set up some kind of an operations center like a SOC. We'll set up our monitoring capabilities and whatever else things we need to do. And then we'll come up with any architecture documents and what have you. And then another team is going to build it. So there's never going to be any hands-on in your role as an architect, because you're a strategist. While you're busy managing stakeholders, there'll be a team of engineers that can actually build these things. So you don't need to learn the code, but you do need to learn how to design systems. And designing systems is a very different set of skills, And most of these skills are going to be business skills that you actually need as a security architect. Believe it or not, it's about a 60 or 70% business job. It's not as technical as what you would think. And the key here is, remember, you're not touching the technology. So you're going to have to and be able to communicate with the C-suite to convince them. You're going to have to be able to sell the C-suite on why they should buy your security architecture and invest on it. Because if you can't convince them to buy it, they get hacked. You have to be quite good at asking information and getting information. You have to be very good at figuring out which vendors are going to be able to supply your security products and solutions. You might need context-aware IAM from one vendor. You might need routers from another vendor. You may need firewalls from another vendor. You may need data loss prevention tools from another vendor and SIEM systems from another vendor. So you're going to have to be very good at vendor management. You're going to have to be extremely good at getting information. You're going to have to be able to exercise influence and have a large number of people to follow you. You will definitely need to be strategic and know how to negotiate and know how to manage the culture related to change. Now, at the same time, when we're talking an architect, we're talking security, what goes into security. So you're not going to touch the data, but you will need to know how do you protect the data. And that means things you would need to think about. And, maybe with the data's life cycle to not keep too many things, for example, or maybe, minimize the data that you actually keep, and then maybe obfuscate the data so it's not visible, or tokenize the data, or anonymize the data, or pseudo-anonymize the data to protect the data. And then we would think about other data things that we could do, like data encryption. And when do we encrypt it? Do we encrypt it in flight? Do we encrypt it at rest? Do we encrypt it with say homomorphic encryption while it's on the CPU so it can be encrypted at the same time? So we have to start thinking about data strategies, and that's really what goes into it. Now, tomorrow night, I'm going to list and go into detail about what we do 100% of the skills. But for now, no, the security architect role is not hands-on. You can't learn it by engineering, and you definitely can't learn it by learning to code. It's a strategy job, much like the physician who's designing the plan versus the nurse that's carrying out the plan. Great question. And as a reminder, we have a free webinar on Thursday at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on how to become a security architect. Chris, bring in the next one. I don't know why I keep calling it tomorrow night. It's Thursday, everyone. Being live. Chris, let's bring in the next one. Thanks, Blake. Very helpful guide for the Google Professional Cloud Architect. Cleared the exam today. I'm so glad our free training was helpful to you. They didn't give you a score. Any plans on a Google Machine Learning Associate class? Not really. And we are 100% focused on architecture, and their machine learning things are geared towards engineers, and that's why we are not. As it stands right now, both David Lithicum and I, we've actually looked for any real any real AI certifications that matter for architects, and we haven't been able to find one. So, and I'm not encouraging people to learn junior level engineering and engineering of proprietary systems as a means to actually learn AI. So not right now. There's nothing good that I can actually recommend for AI. If and when that changes, I definitely will. What is the best pathway for entry-level tech professionals to pursue for individuals transitioning from other disciplines with little or no relevant skills into tech with a prosperous career? So what is the best ways to get hired in tech from a third-party country in Africa? And what are the best skill sets to have for remote work opportunities? So these are two separate problems. So let's get to the first question first. What is the best pathway for an entry-level tech professional to transition into tech? So I've been helping people transition into tech for over 20 years. By your name, were you in Ethiopia, by the way? Just out of curiosity. So when we take someone and they transition careers, and I'm a perfect example. I used to be a nurse practitioner. I used to practice internal medicine, and I decided I was going to build a career in tech. Now, I'm also going to tell you one thing to know is that there is no such thing as an entry-level job. So forget getting an entry-level job. You're going to have to get a better job than an entry-level job, which is going to pay you more, and you're going to start mid-career. So this is a great thing, and this is in any part of the world that we're actually referring to. So why are there no entry-level jobs? Well, the things that entry-level technicians used to do, rack and stack servers and put hypervisors on the servers, for the most part, a lot of that is gone with cloud computing. So all those little entry-level things are gone. Don't worry, there's so many jobs you can have, and you never needed an entry-level job. So I'll tell you what I did. So what I did is I said, well, I want to move into networking, but in those days I had a really good job. I couldn't take an entry-level job. So I said, what would it take to walk in as a top-level network engineer? A network engineer that was so good that anybody would want to hire them, even though the only thing they knew how to do was practice medicine. So I actually asked the 50 people that actually hired, hired networking people, what would you want in the perfect network engineer? There's a reason I'm telling you this, and I'm going to tell you the steps to follow. And I built myself a list of everything the hiring managers wanted that I was told. Filled that in with the, after I got it, I worked on my interview skills, I worked on my soft skills, I worked on my resume, my LinkedIn profile. And within 9 months, I was working as a senior engineer. 3 months later, I was a lead architect. And in a year and a half after that, I was a principal architect. And you can too. So the key to remember is you just need to be good at whatever the new job is. In fact, you have to be as good as people in the top 25% of the role you desire. So finding out it's going to be easy. And you know why it's going to be easy? Because most people focus on 1,001 things that are not related to their job because they don't know what their job is. So I want you to pick a job, whatever that job actually is. And if it's related to a cloud architect, security architect, or an AI architect, join me in a free webinar and I'll help you get there. If it is not, find someone that's working in a principal engineer, distinguished engineer, or a director or VP level person that hires the person and ask them, what do you want in the perfect whatever? If it's a cloud architect, security architect, any architect, I'll tell you. But if it's what would you want in the perfect network engineer? And why? Because now you've got a really, really, really good list. Your name, I thought your name would be in Ethiopia by chance. I love everything from Ethiopia. So I have to get to Addis someday soon. So, you know, so what I want you to do is find that one thing and master that one thing and be good. Because here's the system I've used. And I've used this system for 28 years, and I've used it in Africa. I've used this system in Europe, the Middle East, Asia. I used it for me, and it works. So here's 5 phases, and I really do hope you can join us on a webinar. So if we look at the 5 phases that we use, they're very different than what everybody else does. The first phase is about being great at your job. And that's why I said we have to find this phase. And the reason I use a different system is I come from, healthcare. And in healthcare, you go to school for 4 to 6 years. And as soon as you're ready to be worked, then you take your boards. But you don't take your boards first. So our first phase is about making you great. And this is different based upon what your job is. A security engineer needs a different set of skills than a security architect. So first is figuring out what you want and then developing skills. The second phase is becoming what hiring managers want. Come to any of our webinars and we'll tell you what hiring managers want. They're free, they're on Zoom, so please join us. And when you have that, you're much more hireable. 89% of the people fail the interview because they're not what the hiring manager wants. So this is really essential. When you're done that, you need to build a real world portfolio. So if you're an architect, you might have RFPs and thought leadership documents in your portfolio. You may have reference architectures, what have you. If you're an engineer, not an architect, you might have a Git page based upon what you're doing. But that portfolio has to be specific for the job. You can't spend the wrong one. After you have the skills, you're what the hiring manager wants, and you've got a portfolio to prove it. This is where we start getting your certifications. And the certifications are to get you interviews so you can get hired based upon these other things that you have. And then really, I would do some serious preparation on an interview because it's an opportunity you don't want to miss. And that's what we do with our students. We seriously do a lot of interview preparation. So, That's what I really want you to think of. So that was the first part of your question. There was a second part of your question that I wanted to see. Get to next, Chris. Okay, so what are the best ways to get hired in tech from a third world country in Africa? What are the best skill sets to have for remote work opportunities? So there are opportunities all over the world. You know what? There are not enough people with the skill to actually do the job. So I felt lots of people get jobs in Africa. I will say it's much easier in South Africa than it would be in Ethiopia, but you can still do it. There's opportunities also in other parts of Africa as well. So there's lots of opportunities as the world relies more and more on technology. And there's some cities in Ethiopia that I understand are pretty much like New York City, maybe with a little different kind of traffic, but that's my understanding. So the key is there are opportunities, but what's the real secret to really constantly having opportunities? It's a few things. It's one, pick the one thing you want to be great at and be really great at. Two, it's actually going out there and building your brand. After you have the skills, there's some certifications that actually help you build your brand by creating thought leadership documents. Talk about the things that everybody's worried about, everybody's concerned about, and dive deep. For example, maybe you can put together a thought leadership document on securing generative AI workloads, for example. What's the architecture to do so, if that was what you were interested in AI security? Or it doesn't matter, but you make it related to something that you are actually in. If you're interested in healthcare architectures, you could talk about, what would it take to get AI to be legally usable in various healthcare decision making, for example, or to get AI to read a radiology report. So think about the entire architecture and all the pieces if it was architecture. And when you create these thought leadership documents, do some research. I mean, it's going to take you probably a month to create one of these things, but make it great, learn a lot, and start throwing those things out there. And when you start showing these things, the world starts to see you as an expert, and then they tend to come to you. I know people all over Africa that have such a great brand because of that. And that's typically what you're doing. Now, what are the best skill sets to have? Generally speaking, right now, the world is critically short on cybersecurity professionals, critically short. And a lot of that can be done remote. The world is, where else? The world is very short of cloud computing professionals, but we have to be very specific what and where you do with cloud computing, because there's lots of different jobs and they're not all the same. The world is very short on people that actually can communicate technology well. And that is a huge asset, because you could be in Addis, for example, and there's an airport that you could use, but you could live there and you could potentially fly places, which is what I used to do. And occasionally I would work out of my family home in Greece. At least you have the ability. So if you can explain technology, if you truly understand technology, if you understand the way technology fits together, if you understand the trade-offs, if I use this, I gain this, if I use this, I lose this, you'll always be okay. And here's the reason. People that understand that are near impossible to find. People that understand the impact, how the things fit together and the impact of one change on the other system as opposed to another change on the system, they're the people that can do all the biggest projects in the world, because they say, oh, I get it. If we put a firewall over here, we're going to break this thing over there, because they'll see it. And that takes a lot of knowledge on how things work, but it's okay. You can learn all these great things. So those are there. And if we look at things in the future that cannot be replaced, and I personally think to some degree, in many cases, geography is really irrelevant. But if we look at things that can't be replaced, let's look at these. Because this is kind of, if you think of future skills, I want you to see it. And this is where I want everybody to really think of the world. If we look at the old skills, the skills that are fading away because of AI, you should notice things like programming. That's one that's going away. Multilinguistic people like me that learned multiple languages to do business in other languages, that tends to go away because AI can do the translating. Global citizenship, there were people like me that would travel from country to country, and we would know what kind of things we could say or not say, what kind of foods we could order or not order, what would be considered polite versus offensive. But now AI can help you do that as you're on the way. You can learn it pretty quickly. We don't necessarily need experts like that. People that will be looking at things, AI can be staring at things to see what's broken and whatnot. So that's why these tend to be older skills. And then if we look at the skills of the future, because I want you to have the skills of the future, it's AI or big data. So any architecture career that's designing these things is going to be safe. Technological literacy, well, we have to, that goes with any tech career. But creative thinking. How can you creatively solve problems? And you know what? The more you know about something, the better problems you'll be able to solve. So that's why I want you to get a deep knowledge on how everything works, not just how to configure it. How do things work? Because when you know how the things work, you can think analytically and compare options because you understand them. And that's going to be critical for any great tech job. Leadership and influence. Computers aren't going to, convince anybody to spend $1 billion on technology or to create the new hospital or to do anything that really matters. So leadership and influence are going to be critical skills for the future. By the way, all these skills so far are architect jobs or any other executive position. Managing talent, which is people and bringing out the best in them, and wanting to learn. So there are the global skills for the future. These comes from the World Economic Forum, not me. I'm just in a complete agreement with them. So those are the skills that are there. So think cybersecurity, critical shortages. And the reality is there's not that many people that have deep knowledge. So go out there, become great, build your brand, and you'll be fine. Thank you with the great info, Mike. What's the best way to get a mentor, specifically enterprise architect? Well, it's not going to be easy. So if you work at a company and they have a wonderful enterprise architecture practice, ask one of those enterprise architects. Now, the problem is what I want you to understand is most good enterprise architects are earning a lot of money. I mean, I can remember where enterprise architects at our company in 2005 were getting $250,000 a year. It's gone up significantly since then. So when you start looking at an executive that's highly paid, that's very busy, they typically don't want to take on mentors. But if they work at the company you work at, that's what I do. Because of that, that's why I actually created our enterprise architect program, because there's not a lot of us to train it. I mean, Penn State University trains enterprise architects, but by the time you're done, they teach about half of the skills. You'll need to learn a lot of the other skills, and it's like $9,000 for the course. And we obviously have our own where we teach 100% of everything, and we guide our students through enterprise architectures, and the students present it back to us, and we coach them on executive presence. So that's the only way that I know is to ask someone at your work or to take a course or a coach and find a coach and have them mentor you. It's not that easy because we're all in such huge demand. I basically retired and I just wanted to train the next set of architects. So we basically came up with a course and charged, for the most part, our cost to be able to run it so we could really change lives and create enterprise architects and cloud architects and AI architects, because it's my life's work. It's what I just love doing. And it's the most fun I'm having in my retirement is training the next generation of technology professionals. But that's what I would do. Ask in your company, see if there's a good enterprise architecture practice in your company. And that way the person's not going to think out of nowhere, why are you coming to me? Otherwise, unless you know a really good enterprise architect that's made it to the top, if so, I would ask them. That's the worst thing they can say is no. And the key is, it's good to have mentors, and they don't all need to be from the enterprise architect background. And I'll tell you what I mean by this. So an enterprise architect is an executive, right? So I had some sales executives as mentors so they could teach me how to better influence the C-suite and the board. And so I had mentors that were really good presentation coaches so they could make me a better presenter. I had coaches that were experts on various components, like an executive coach to work on my executive presence and executive decision making. So the key is you can always get various coaches along the way. And that's what we do once you get to a certain level. We'll be getting various coaches as well. And what all the coaching comes down to, it always comes down to the art of architecture, those executive skills, not the tech skills. Great questions. From pivoting to a data scientist to an Azure cloud architect role at a university without any real architecture experience, Any considerations for your first task on-premise to cloud migration? Well, yes. The first is, should you do it? And we have to look at what is your rationale for a cloud migration. If it's to save money, I promise you it's going to cost you far more on the cloud in most cases. Now, why are you going to the cloud? Are you going to the cloud because you have an old dilapidated data center? Oh, you're only migrations or delayed data center? Are you migrating to the cloud because you're trying to have less staff and more simpler things? So the first thing before we ever think about anything to here is to determine what are we trying to achieve. So let's bring it up a little, because an architect role is what are you trying to achieve? So the first thing we have to figure out is what problem we're trying to solve. And what I mean by that is the university trying to increase the number of students, and if so, is the architecture related to that? Is the university working on increasing the graduation rate of the students? And that's a different architecture for that. Is the university working on enhancing the reputation or whatever? That's something else. So typically speaking, we need to know the real thing, what we're actually doing first. The second thing we need to figure out is what technology makes sense. No, the technology comes after we know what the actual goal is. So the last thing I would do is just say, move something. I want to know why. Now, what happened initially is the cloud providers sold people, if you come to our cloud, we're going to make it different for you. Now, ultimately, here's what happened. They went off of their data center network and they plugged it somewhere else, and they just paid a couple times more. So we have to figure out what the motivation is and what the right strategy is to migrate. Because things that you need to understand is if you have data storage on premise and you accidentally set the wrong permissions, so what? You have data in the cloud and somebody accidentally sets the wrong permissions and it's now visible on the internet. So there's going to be a lot of things that changes. So the first thing that I would do is make sure I understood the network in the data center. And that means IP networking, that means routing, that means switching, that means virtual machines, it means the different kinds of storage, it means containers and container orchestration, it means understanding application virtualization and ever, because how do you design a strategy if you don't know what your options are and don't know what the strengths and weaknesses actually are? That kind of thing. So that's the first thing. And then once you know what you're trying to achieve, then you can determine what it makes sense. Price out the storage. I can tell you, for example, we use 96 terabytes of storage at our organization. I have 2 RAID arrays. Each RAID array cost me $5,000. I keep one in New Jersey. I keep the second RAID array in Florida, and we back up offsite. Now, the reality was it would be about $3,500 a month to store that on AWS. So $3,500 a month for 12 months is approximately $40,000 a year. Times 5 years is $200,000 to host it there versus my $10,000, which is what we spent. And I've had it for about 5 years. I actually am running a private cloud running Nutanix. And I bought 10 servers from Amazon for $400 each, and they charge $1,100 a month for those same servers. So the key is, what's the motivation, and does it make sense to go to the cloud? Otherwise, you'll be doing to hear what a lot of people do, which is just which is bringing it back home. I think you give us some. We lack ETL technologies with a lot of data discrepancies, no automation causing task redundancy, with Oracle now providing enough support for on-premise data centers. Okay, so you could do all those same things in the data center. Unfortunately, your team doesn't know how to do it. So if your team doesn't know how to do these things in the data center, that's a great migration reason for the cloud. And that's one of the reasons people go to the cloud and they pay extra for the cloud, because they know they don't have the staffing and they're looking for more of the simplicity and more of the elegance. You may find your organization still has to deal with Oracle, and it'll be the same support you're going to get on cloud that you would actually on premise, but you'll find that you'll do but I at least understand the rationale. It totally makes sense. But lacking ETL technologies is a pretty easy problem to solve. And the data discrepancies you'll have to solve them the same way in the cloud. Just please keep that in mind. As far as the automation, you're going to have to set some kind of automation up, but you can do that and it makes sense. And that's where, in some cases, some of these cloud native things and cloud native provider tools make sense when you've got people that are looking for the simple, looking for the elegant, what have you. So to here, I'd still like you to learn the network and the data center, and I'd like you to get a free copy of this How to Become a Cloud Architect article we actually wrote, because I want you to understand a few things. One is you're probably like 98% of organizations be multi-cloud a year from now or 2 years from now if you're going into the cloud, and you probably need to understand the cloud. Plus, also, I want you to learn the cloud, and you can't learn the cloud by learning Azure. And the reason is if you just learn AWS or Azure, what they won't do is teach you what they have. It was an intentional decision of the cloud providers not to use real technology, or at least from AWS. So they made up words like instance. So they came up with the term EC2 instance instead of calling it a virtual machine. Now, Azure calls it a virtual machine. Oracle calls it a virtual machine. Google's marketing department called it a compute engine instance. And if all you know is that, you won't know anything. But if you know what is a virtual machine by comparison, and if you understand how to size a virtual machine and how to determine the number of CPU cores, DRAM, disk performance for that virtual machine, then you can do it in any cloud in the entire world, because it's not the vocabulary. So I'd love you to get that document. Come to one of our webinars if you want, and I can go over the exact skills. But please understand, it's going to take a lot more of knowing the what, the why, and the how, because all these things you're talking about are all simple solutions to solve, either in the data center or on the cloud. But the challenge is many people don't know how to do them in the data center, which is why the cloud products seem so actually exciting. So what I would do is I get some serious training really fast on architectural design. And architectural design is not like actually building things. It's more designing systems. So what I mean by this is, as you go to the cloud, where do you host your server? Do you host it on a virtual machine and have complete control of it and have maximum performance? Or do you host it in a platform as a service manner where someone else is in control of your destiny? Can you afford that? Can you, or can you not afford that? Can you handle the security of application virtualization, or is it insufficient for your needs? Maybe a virtual machine would be a better solution. Where does your data have to be, and can your data be sent to different parts? So all these things have to be thought of, but it makes total sense. So the key is learn the network, learn the data center, and then all clouds. And at that point, it's just matching up marketing terms from the cloud provider with the stuff that you know. And then when you actually know the network and the data center, and you see the weaknesses in block storage, and you understand why block storage is slow by comparison, and why you might need RAID to work around the performance of block storage, you'll know what to do and why. And when you understand the difference between the strengths and weaknesses of a private line versus an IPsec tunnel versus a SASE wide area network versus a VPN, you'll know which wide area network to choose, because you're going to need wide area networks to connect you to clouds and otherwise. So that's what I would say. But if you want to come to an architect webinar, when's the next enterprise architect or cloud architect webinar we would do, Chris? Because either one of those would be perfect for this person, and I want to make sure that they get that one. Yeah. Okay. Jericho, I saw a posting on LinkedIn saying real cloud architects in 225 must know Terraform, IAM, containers, domain-driven design. Is this true in my experience? Jericho, if I knew any architects that were doing this, they would be fired within 24 hours of their job. And here's the reason why. The architect is a strategist. The architect is a business executive. And if I've got a $250 an hour resource, I'm not going to have them do the kind of coding that would be done overseas for $25 an hour. So that's why it doesn't happen. So let's talk about why these job descriptions and why things look so crazy. And to some degree, it depends upon the type of architect you would be, because a cloud architect is not deploying things. Now, I will tell you, and why you're seeing some people write this, is a lot of people aren't architects. And what I mean by this is a lot of engineers try to say what an architect needs to have. And I see it every single day. And a lot of people come to me and they say, my software developer told me I needed to code to be an architect. And I say, but they're not an architect. So I can tell you right now, anybody that's actually as an architect that's doing these things won't be making it in their job very long. They won't be getting promoted and they won't be getting fired. Now, Jericho, I can give you some data, some data that actually shows that when it comes to interviews, over 60% of the people fail the interview because they talk about technology like an engineer. I can also tell you that lack of business acumen is one of the primary reasons. Lack of being able to transfer risk, lack of executive presence, but no. But I do know there's some techie architects out there that hate being architects. Now, Jericho, I'll also tell you that 10 years later, they're still in that solutions architect role. They've never made it to a principal architect distinguished. They've never got promoted to any bigger roles. They're still in their low paying role. Why? Because they're married to the technology. And I see some that are like, oh, look, I'm going to develop my software development. I'm going to develop this. And quite frankly, Jericho, I've had some people that work for me that were saying, Mike, I want to learn the code. And I've offered them the opportunity for a different position. And I said, sounds like you would like to be an engineer. Would you like a job on the engineering team? And they say, why are you asking me this? I said, because I need my architects to manage stakeholders, focus on business strategy. And then they said, why? And I said, because 80% of architectures fail to provide any business value. 80%. And why are 80% of architectures not providing business value? Because the people that are working as architects aren't focusing on the right things. So for any architect that says that, I beg you, do not listen to them. I'm pretty sure they'll be fired fairly quickly. And the reason they'll be fired is they're not doing their architect job and they're focusing on the wrong things. I can also tell you that I've seen architects that go from that. All of a sudden, you give them some executive skills. You tell them you're not allowed to configure your own proof of concept. You now are bringing engineers to do it. You're now scoping the proof of concept, determining success metrics, escalating any situations. You're now leading this team. You're now seeing do that. And I've seen them get $200,000 plus raises to get rid of their engineering mindset. So I've met lots of doctors that are great. I've met lots of doctors that are horrible. And everybody's entitled to their opinion. But for any architect that wants to touch engineering, they'd never work in my organization. And you'd never see them in any real elite organization like an IBM or a Cisco or a Microsoft, because they want their architects to be strategists. And you can't strategize. But everybody's entitled to their own opinion, but when you see people that for years aren't getting jobs and they wonder why, and they're not getting promoted and they wonder why, that's the reason, Jericho. It's funny. I like to ask David Lithingham because he's made it to the top. I've made it to the top. And I say, David, when was the last time you touched the technology? He said, about 35 years ago when I became an architect. And then he says, Mike, when was the last time you did it? And I said 25 years ago when I became an architect. I was not even allowed to touch the technology by my company. If you've got some questions, please bring them in. Otherwise, we'll end a little early today, which is totally fine by me. You're trying to apply for a solutions architect or a technical architect job, but wonder if you believe it's a must to have some architect certifications. So having an architect certification, not necessarily. I've gotten people hired without architect certifications as long as you have the architect skill. And what I mean by an architect skill is, do you have any idea how to walk in the room with the CEO and how to identify the key stakeholders? Do you have any idea how to convince the board of directors to spend $1 billion on your architectural solution? Do you have any idea how to create and lead an architecture team? Do you have any idea how to respond to an RFI, RFP, or RFQ? Do you have any idea what it will take to coordinate with various vendors in a solution? And if the answer is no, you need to be trained. And if the answer is yes, you should be good to go. I can definitely tell you, of all the people that I've worked with, the people that are easily able to make this transition are management strategy consultants, for example, that have been doing this kind of consulting work. So what I'm going to do is recommend you come to one of our architect webinars and see that. But it's not about your certifications. It's about your skills. It's 100% about your skills. And that's really the key. What are your skills? Because we don't interview people in an architecture interview the way we do an engineering interview. We could be technical. For example, I could ask a basic question that almost anybody should know, but most won't know. Could you tell me what's in the header of an IP packet? And based upon the header of an IP packet, what types of things I could do from a security perspective. Now, that's a very basic fundamentals question, and any architect should be able to answer it. But that's why I say architecture is not engineering. Engineering is more how-to. Architecture is what's going on under the hood. How are these things kind of talking to each other? How is it enhancing the business in some way, shape, or form? But no, our certifications are not necessary. Now, I still recommend them. And I recommend first, learn how to be an architect. Second, become what the hiring managers want, because 89% of the people fail the interview because they're not what the hiring manager wants. So first learn the architect role, then learn how to be what the hiring manager wants. After that, then I'd build a portfolio. And truthfully, you're ready to be hired there right then and there. But if you're not having a good time getting an interview, then get 3 certifications, like the AWS Solutions Architect Professional is a good one, or the Azure Solutions Architect Expert. Then get a TOGAF 10, and then maybe a CISSP. And those are the certifications we teach to get our cloud architects seen and known. And then after that, work on your resume, work on your LinkedIn profile, and train for the interview, and you'll be okay. But make sure you've got those architect skills. If not, join me on the architecture webinar tomorrow night, and I'll go over every single skill that you would need when you tell me what kind of solutions architect. Because a cloud solutions architect needs a different set of skills than a security solutions architect or an AI solutions architect. And a technical architect is more of an engineer than an actual architect. So we need to know what kind. And if you want to know, tell me what kind of architect, I can be more specific on the skills with you, and I'd be happy to. What are the top 4 or 5 skills someone should focus on to land a solutions architect job and keep going afterward? You're trying to transition jobs and industries. So, great question. So when we interview a solutions architect, and obviously got to pass the interview, there's a couple of things we're looking at. The first thing we have to ask ourselves is, can I put this person in front of the CEO and the board? If the answer is no, I can't hire you. So that's going to be one of those critical things. So that means you're going to have a lot of business knowledge, a lot of CXO relevancy, knowing how to communicate through the C-suite. So that's going to be very critical. That's the first thing we actually look for. Now, the second thing we actually look for is how you communicate. It's going to be the second and most critical thing for the job. Because if you can't communicate well, you won't be able to get the requirements. And if you can't get the requirements, we have no architecture. So those are going to be the first 2 things I'm going to look for. I am, as a third thing, going to see, can you do the job? And how am I going to see if you can do the job? I'm going to give you an architectural case study, and I'm going to make you come back and give a presentation in front of a panel of people. So the next 2 skills that really are going to matter most are going to be your presentation skills, because you're going to give presentations every day as a solutions architect. And if you can't give a presentation, you'll fail the interview. That's why a presentation is the last interview. And then beyond that, it's just the ability to do the architect job, the ability to know how to walk into a client, know what kind of questions to ask, know how it'll be able to make the proper diagnosis or hypothesis, and then be able to come up with a strategic blueprint to help that organization be better. That's the job. Now, what will make you a better job? What will add a lot more to your salary? Strong sales skills. Because in a solutions architect job, you're paid by your ability to sell. You basically you work with a sales rep or an account manager, whatever they choose to call them based at the company. And either the account manager gets some form of commissions and you get a quarterly bonus, usually speaking, that's related to sales. What you sold in your region, that kind of thing. So sales skills are going to have a big impact. Now, I'll tell you, I'll give you the thing that changed my life. And it's what a manager told me when I was young and working as a senior network architect. Actually, I was a principal network architect in those days. And my manager said, but then I took a sales engineer job for a couple of months. And then my manager said to me, Mike, do you know the difference between a $150,000 sales engineer solutions architect like you and a $300,000 enterprise architect? And this is in 2003. And when I heard that, I don't know how to say it, but I was like, you got to tell me the secret here. I mean, I had student loans to pay back and things. I'm like, I got to get the secret to this thing. And my manager says, look, Mike, he said, your tech's only going to get that far. The solutions architect role, these are generally relatively junior level roles. He says, do you know the difference to go up? I'm like, tell me. He said, Mike, it's the impact you can make on my clients. And I said, aren't I making a big impact? I made all their networks work. And my manager said, it's not about making the tech work. It's about increasing their sales. It's about improving their employee productivity. It's about changing the direction of the business. He said, make an impact to the business, not just the tech, and you doubled your salary. He said, in order to do that, you're going to learn how to sell. So he sent me to sales training beyond what I had. He said, you're going to need to give a better presentation. So they sent me to presentation skills training. They had executive coaches and actors teaching us about stage presence. He said, you're going to need a better exercise influence. So he sent me to training for that. He said, and they did that. Now, at the same time, my manager said, you need extra business acumen. So I went and got an MBA. 2 years later, I'm in that big role that he described to me. And this is decades ago. And it's still that way ever since. So to me, that was the biggest, most critical thing that I learned, that early in your architect career, it's about the tech knowledge. As you move up in your architecture career, it's about your business, your impact, your sales. So mostly the business skills. That's really the questions. So that's what I would do. And I would definitely come to our free architecture webinar on Thursday. Because that way we can get deep. I can assess you and any kind of questions, and we'll be able to help you a lot. We'll get to the next one. My team accidentally forgot one. Sorry about that. Freedom Lens. In an interview, would you rather be meek or bold, passive or aggressive, or laid back or intense? None of them. I want you to walk in happy, friendly, with a whole lot of executive presence, and show you've got some energy about you, some enthusiasm about you. Now, I still want you to be relaxed as you do that. I mean, that's the key. So if you walk in there with a 1,000-yard stare, if you know what I mean, you look like you're ready for battle at all times. Well, that's not going to be something that's going to work well for a corporate office. So, and nobody wants to hire meek either. They're not going to hire the person with the lack of executive presence. It's sad. And that's why I teach executive presence. So they're going to look for someone that looks powerful to them. And I'm not talking about physical size. I'm talking about executive presence. We can hire passive people. I mean, I need people to know what to do and do their things on their own. But I can't hire someone that's too aggressive either. That's going to terrify my client. So everything's about balance. So lots of executive presence, lots of emotional intelligence, lots of strength, lots of inner will, lots of fight until the job is done. And at the same time, soft touch and gentle. So if you think of a German Shepherd and you think about, how it's with its owners, it's very powerful. It's a bold animal, but it's beautiful and it's gentle unless it doesn't have to be. And if you can make that if you could take that German Shepherd and turn it into a golden retriever where it just looks like love, and that golden retriever will still protect its parents, that's what you want to be. Strong, but soft. In fact, I think if we use the reference from Tai Chi, there's a reference of being like steel wrapped in cotton. So at all times, your yin and your yang, your hard and your soft is balanced. That's the way I would describe it. But then again, I'm a martial artist. Again, capable, but soft and gentle. Great question, Freedom Lens. User 12. Mike, to what extent does a master's degree in information systems prepare graduates for a role as a cloud architect? 0. I would strongly never advise anyone to do a degree in information systems for an architecture career. And here's the reason why. An architecture career is more of a business career. So I would tell you to get a master's in business administration, just like I did, to be a better architect. That would help you. But a master's in information systems is going to have some people that really don't know what they're talking about things that were 20 years old that aren't relevant today. It's going to be deeply technical. You'll learn things like how to code and how to play with Linux, and it'll be 100% unrelated to your actual job. So I definitely wouldn't do that. But a master's in business administration would. And here's the reason why. In your job as an architect, you're not going to code. You're not going to configure. And the reality is learning to code is no different than learning another language. So if I taught you Greek, and I speak Greek at home, I think it's great. My wife speaks Spanish and Greek and of course English. But if I turned you another language, do you think it's going to teach you how to design a security architecture? The answer is no. And if we were to look at an architect skill set, and I really want to kind of make that clear to you, let's kind of look at a cloud architect skill set. Here's the first thing that I want you to see. 75% of our job is non-technical. So you have to understand business because your job is to be a strategist to create a strategy to enhance business performance. So you have to know business, and that's why I got an MBA. Now, if you're one of our students, we teach you business because you can't do the job without it. You have to be able to go to the C-suite and convince them to adopt your things, which means you have to communicate in C-suite language. Meaning you might be talking about net present value or an ROI model. You could be talking about EBITDA or something like that. If it sounds like a foreign language, you need to learn that language because that's most of our job. 50% of the cloud architect's job and solutions architect job is managing stakeholders. So you'll have to be very good at managing stakeholders. Now, an architecture that occurs without proper change management is 7 times less likely to succeed. And this means managing the cultural change of any change. Now, you will have to be able to walk in the room with the C-suite and the board and convince them to spend $1 billion in your career. I promise you, I've had to do it for a customer. And that's going to take a lot of executive presence and executive communication skills. You will have to give presentations constantly, including the last interview for an architect job as a presentation. You'll have to be able to what's called exercise influence and convince people to follow you. And you will have to sell because the solutions architect is usually a pre-sales job. Now, when we get into tech things, the reason I say learning code is going to be irrelevant is let's say you learn how to code, which is what and they will teach you that, a little bit about that in a master's degree. You'll learn a little about coding and a little junior bit about compute, but not that much. We don't code. Now, instead, we look at application architecture patterns and application integration points and API trade-offs and protecting APIs, not how to code. Even if you went to school for a master's degree, you won't learn networking or IP addressing or routing or switching or wide area networking. You still have to learn that afterwards. And in your master's degree, unless it's an MBA, they won't teach you anything about business continuity or disaster recovery planning. They might in your MBA program. Even if you went to school, you wouldn't learn about storage and choosing the right storage option and working around slow storage. Now, load balancing is something you probably won't learn in your master's degree, and whether we're talking about load balancing between clouds, load balancing between containers or virtual machines or microservices, or load balancing across GPUs or load balancing between CPU cores or what have you, we'll teach you obviously how to do these things because it's part of the job, but you won't learn that in that program anyway. You obviously won't learn cybersecurity and security architecture in that program, which is why we teach all these things that are here. You won't learn enough about data in that program and data privacy, data security, what have you. You'll learn a little, but nothing close to what you'll need. So you'll still have to learn it. You will learn a little compute. They'll probably talk about containers to a degree and virtual machines, but it's not going to get in deep enough into what you need and how to size them. They'll cover a little AI, but realistically speaking, nothing what you need. And in today's world, IAM is everything. And whether it's customer IAM or RIAM or context-aware IAM or role-based or attribute-based or what kind of authentication mechanisms to choose, that's a big part of the job. And honestly, you won't learn any of that in that program, which is why I say, at least if you get the MBA, you'll have a lot of the skills you actually need. You'll cover maybe 30% of the stuff on the left. So 30% you might get out of the MBA, where you'll get 0 out of that information systems degree, because that's designed for engineers. and architecture as being an executive, not an engineer. Very, very different kind. You believe that a strong understanding of how to build and operate things is what really develops strong architectural thinking later on. Do you think pursuing the AWS CloudOps Associate certification after the AA is a good step to deepen your technical skills? No. So I think you have to understand what technical skills really are, and all the hands-on things you do won't develop them. And here's the reason why. You give me someone that's been a cloud engineer for 10 years, you know what they know? How to configure something. And then I ask them, and I say to them something very basic, like, we have 30 million hits on this website every single day. We hold 2 billion citizens' records on this. Given that a security, any security breach would be critical, how would you design our demilitarized zone for that web-facing application? And do you know what I get from all the people that have done all the cloud ops and done all the hands-on things? They have no idea where to go. Now, you give me someone that's done 10 cloud projects and build websites, and I'll tell you what they haven't learned, and this is why they always fail the architect interview. I interview them and say, great. It's great that you built this product. Could you tell me what your security plan for the website is? Because I don't see a real DMZ architecture. And they say, huh? And then I say, I see you chose the Nginx web server. Could you tell me your rationale of choosing Nginx versus Apache? Now, could you tell me what you did to harden the operating system? What is your endpoint detection and response that you chose to use? Where are your logs going? Where is your Siemens source system? Why did you choose the Siemens source system that you chose? Could you describe to me the customer IAM strategy as well as your internal IAM strategy for the website? And you know what happens? All the hands-on people have no idea where to go because they become experts of how to and not. Now, the other thing that I want you to understand when it comes to the architect world is the tech is not the main part of our job. So, Hytham, your job as an architect is to go into an organization and make their business better. So if you walk into a hospital and they say, we have too many people that die from adverse reactions to medications in this hospital, we need you to create a system that's going to fix that. Do you know where to begin? Now, of course you won't if you've been focusing on building. Now, if you know architecture skills, you'll know where to start. You'll know which questions to ask of which to. What is the framework for actually finding the right problem? And then you'll be able to create a team of people that can do the deep dive at what it is, and then you'll be able to do it. So the key is understand that. And that's why the majority of people fail the interview is they get tech, they get tech, they get tech, they get tech. And then they get on an interview, and here's what's going to happen on an interview. Someone's going to say the company's weighted average cost of capital is 7.5%. Could you tell me with a weighted average cost of capital of 7.5%, how I would use that information to calculate whether a Nutanix cloud would make more sense versus an AWS cloud? And the person won't know how to do it. Where the customer is saying, I'm trying to increase revenue on my e-commerce website, then you won't know where to go because you're focusing on your hands-on things. So I want you to really understand for real. You know, like, let's say you're in the Middle East. If you've ever seen the Burj Al Arab in, say, Dubai, see how beautiful it is? Or if you go to Palm Island in Dubai and you see that in the middle of the sea, it's beautiful. But you know what? The people that actually designed it didn't build it. And you know why the reason is? The people that build stuff don't have any idea how to design stuff. That's why architects go to college and study architecture, and the engineers study engineering. Completely different thing. So I ask you, could you answer any of these questions from focusing on? If the answer is no, don't learn any more engineering. I wish it wasn't the case, and I can tell you from experience, you give me two sets of people and I tell you who gets hired first. You give me Wallace Agana, there's a video of him on our YouTube channel. He spent 6 months with me, and he's now an enterprise architect with JP Morgan Chase. You give me Yvonne. Yvonne was a college student hired by AWS. Within 6 months of training with me, his last job was a waiter. He's been promoted 3 times. There's a reason. His buddy Jordan, hired as a college student by AWS Solutions Architect, promoted 3 times. Coyote, I just spoke to him, hired as AWS Solutions Architect, promoted several times. None of them ever worked here. Now, Harsha, was one of the best cloud engineers I've ever met. Harsha was a cloud engineer for 11 years. It took me 14 months to get him hired as an architect because he had to forget engineering. Loga, another great example, cloud engineer or DevOps engineer with almost 14 years experience. Took a little longer than her to get hired, twice as long as the sales rep. So please understand, architecture is not engineering. Please understand that as you master engineering, you will never make it through an architecture interview because they're looking for different things. So here's your skill set list of a cloud architect. Here's what I want you to see. Most of our job is here because this is how we design an architecture, and maybe this will help you because I really do want you to be, well, this is actually our job. So most of our job, the first part of our job is meeting with the C-suite, the executive sponsors. We have to figure out what they are trying to achieve. What's the vision of the architecture? Maybe it's an AI recommendation engine for a website to increase revenue on that website. So what's the scope of the project? Is it just the website? Or are we working on various data structures inside? Do we need another data preparation product? What is it going to take? What are the business requirements that we need? And then we identify the key stakeholders. Now, for the next 6 months, as an architect, you're going to have to create a team and lead a team to have conversations with stakeholders. And during this time, if you're going to be good at what you need to do, you need to map out the organization's chart. You need to map out the key business processes, because if you don't map out the key business processes and know what they are, do you know what's going to happen? You'll break part of the business. And that's why 80% of projects fail, because they don't map out business processes. You'll have to map it out. You'll have to map out the business capabilities and create like a capabilities list. And you'll have to determine which capabilities you can enhance to get the business to its goal. And that's a big part of the job. You'll also have to map out the value streams, which are the steps along the way that a company uses to make money. And if you don't do this, you'll never know what to design. So this, by the way, between here and here is about 60% of the job, 70% of the job. Now, as we move down, you're going to have to design the data architecture and what goes into that data architecture, which is the data flows, the data ownership, the data categorization, any kind of data classification strategy we might have, like secret, top secret, what have you, any kind of data privacy standard, whether it's tokenization, obfuscation, anonymization, pseudonymization, any kind of encryption standard that we're going to choose, when it needs to encrypt it, what have you. So again, you're not going to learn this stuff, because let's say you've configured things all day long. Could you tell me the difference between anonymization, pseudonymization, tokenization, and the architectural trade-offs of choosing them? That's what we need as an architect, and you don't learn that from learning how to build it. We'll have to do the same thing with the application architecture. What needs to talk to what? Where are the integration points? What kind of APIs? How do we protect them? What have you? And of course, the technology architecture would be like the storage, the compute, what have you. Now, once we know what this stuff is, then we replace the technology with the actual vendors that we choose. So that's the solutions architecture. Swap out our virtual machines for EC2 instances, swap out our block storage for EBS, that kind of thing. Then we have to plan the migration, and planning the migration is more about assessing, do they have enough people? What kind of people do they need to hire? What are going to be the skill sets of that hire? What kind of a statement of work do we actually need? What do we need to put in the migration contract? Can we move in a single step, a double step, a triple step, what have you? Now, once we plan the migration, we set up a governance structure. Who's going to govern the architecture? Who's going to govern the implementation? Because we're going to be at another client. What's it going to take to change something? What happens when we need to make improvements? Who evaluates those improvements, like an architectural review board, what have you? So that's the job, which is why I want you to get hired. But I promise you, if you start learning DevOps, you start learning SysOps, you start learning how to code, 3 years from now, you'll still be looking for an architect job. And every single day I tell people this, then they go take a boot camp to learn how to code. 2 years later, they're not hired. Then we train them and they're hired. And that's the reason why. So yes, I want you to be deeply, deeply technical. But deeply technical is a different deeply technical than you can ever learn how to be by being a technician. It's how to learn by being tech strategist. I really, really hope that helps. You've been working as a senior network engineer for the last 10 years. What role should you focus on if you want to become an architect, between a network architect or a cloud architect? So, Lilia, here's the question I have for you. What do you want to do? And I know this sounds silly, but what you used to do has nothing to do with what you can do tomorrow. Trust me. I spent about 7 years of my life as a firefighter paramedic, and that's how I paid my way through college. Then I practiced internal medicine as a nurse practitioner. Then I decided I was going to be a network engineer. 9 months later, I was a CCA and one of the first in the world. My number is 7417, and I was a senior network engineer. 3 months later, I was a network architect. And then guess what? I got bored, so I became a security architect. And then I wanted to get promoted, so I became an enterprise architect, and I learned new skills. What would you like to do? Would you like to design networks? Would you like to secure an organization? Would you like to design the cloud strategy for an organization? That's the real secret. And that's really where I would say, what's going to make you happy? Look, you can find a $500,000 network architect job if you want, if your skills are right. I know plenty of people that are there. You can find a $500,000 cloud architect job if your skills are right. You can get an $800,000 cheap architect job if your skills are right. Or you could be pigeonholed into the lowest architect job or not get there if your skills are wrong. So the question I ask you is, what would you like to do? Because it doesn't matter what your background is. Yvonne was a waiter and he's hired by AWS. Ballender was a stay-at-home mom hired by AWS as a solutions architect. Lenny was our video editor who's hired by Citrix as a solutions architect. Jermaine was selling landscaping gear now working as an enterprise architect. Noah was a social worker now working as an architect. Vladimir was a 24-year-old college student working as an architect. They didn't have any other tech jobs before this. What if I told you that the enterprise architect job, which is generally speaking the highest paying of all architect roles and the most senior, 50%, meaning 1 out of every 2 enterprise architects never worked in a tech career before. 50%. Why? Because it's so hard to find a tech professional with that many executive skills and consulting skills. So kind of keep that in the back of your mind. So what would you like to do? Because you could do either. You're just going to, for a network architect, you're still going to have to learn network architecture, which is different than network engineering. Now, it used to be that Cisco had a different curriculum. And actually, they still do. The CCDE is dedicated towards network architecture. The CCIE is related to network engineering. So there is that. But there's always a need for networking people. And here's the key. We're in the midst of a big cloud repatriation movement, which means we're building a whole lot of private clouds. Private clouds need networking experts. So you're good in either case. The key is, what would you want to do? Most people, I will tell you, like me, that were network architects, decided to move into cloud architect roles. And why? Because as we started looking at the migration of what was going on, we started to say, so the data centers that we built that were routers and switches are now holding servers and storage. And it's just a new version of the same old thing. Meet the new boss, the same as the old boss. So that's why we went there, and we saw lots of opportunity in cloud computing. But I have friends like Russ White that stayed as pure network architects and are fine. So the key is, what do you really enjoy doing? Some of us love networking. And if you love networking and that's going to be your dream, stay there. If you find that the network was the first thing, and then all of a sudden the network with the compute and the storage and everything integrated is really interesting to you, like it was for me, go to cloud architecture. But they're both great. The real key is, what's going to make you happy, not what you've done in the past. Great question. You left your job as a network engineer working as a network operations specialist 10 months ago to develop coding skills. Okay. And understanding SDN with tools to build it. Unfortunately, you wasted your time to develop a core skill. You were offered a managerial position before leaving the job. Well, that would have been good to take. What should your next steps make it worthwhile, since you are in no man's land, I'm assuming, and have no direction? What's our opinion on getting your composure and becoming more appealing to recruiters in order to land a remote job? Okay, so that's actually an interesting thing. So I know a little bit about networking, and by little, I mean a lot. And I will tell you, if I walk around and ask the majority of the CCIEs that I know, do you know how to code? And I mean, the people that have the best jobs, the majority would say, no, Mike, I don't know how to touch Linux, and I don't know how to code. Now, these are the people with deep routing skills but plain is there is that. So if you ever have something, I generally wouldn't recommend leaving what you have to go learn something else. I would generally try, if and whenever possible, to do it at the same time, unless you hated what you were actually doing. So if your networking skills are good, and I'm really thinking about this deeply, thinking about where you actually live. So let's talk about a few things. And actually, you know what? Maybe come to the webinar if you want to look. I can look at your LinkedIn profile there as well to see what you actually have on there. But my opinion of gaining your composure, optimizing your brand, and tuning up your skills to make sure they're sharp, and go getting something else. Yeah, definitely do it, and you can, and get creative about it. I mean, really, really get creative. Go out there, reach out to people, because I'll tell you what, it is very hard to find good people. It is very hard to find highly motivated people. And if I look at Yvonne, Yvonne was a student of mine, and I just have a lot of respect for him. He came to an offsite of ours, and he spoke to our group. We had trained him. We got him his first job at AWS. He spoke to our group. And he told me he told the entire group how challenging his job and life was when he was living in Cameroon. And then he described, how wonderful his life is with this job that we helped him get. And one of the reasons I've always loved Yvonne is his internal will and motivation. So when we taught Yvonne how to build the brand, and we taught a little bit about Yvonne how to sell, he took it upon himself to reach out to, and I am not joking, like 50 different recruiters. And he wrote them personalized letters about why he would needed to be there and what he would do for them and how hard he was willing to work. Just his outreach got him the interviews that he actually wanted at the company that he actually wanted. And it was outreach. Now, first, we taught him what to say, how to say it, and those kind of things. But the outreach was there. Go out there and do some creative outreach. Use social media. Go build your brand. But I want you to do before this is figure out what you want exactly. I want you to get your skills, polish them up. And I mean polish them up real good. Get them strict. Get them good. Practice explaining everything that you know. If it's networking, for example, how does a host connect to another host through the router? What are all the steps from the ARP to the routing table? Look, all of it. Be able to explain it. Be able to explain how OSPF sends, whatever it is that you want to be good at, be able to explain it. And why am I telling you this? How do I know on an interview what you know? I'm not going to ask you to set up a router. I'm going to ask you to explain something to you. I'm going to query you on, say, BGP or OSPF or LSAs or something. So I want you to be real polished up. I want you to focus heavily on your soft skills. Why? Because that's the big secret in getting hired. 89% of the people aren't there. So here you are, you're creating leadership content. You're creating thought leadership. Each day you're posting something that's showing energy, enthusiasm, passion for the work. You're showing expertise. You're doing some outreach. Someone will love to have someone like that on their team. And go out there and do it. You'll be good. Please pop into any webinar you want. Ask any questions you want live on Zoom. We really want to make sure you get to your goals. But that's what I would do. That's exactly what I would do. Saw your message, and I would love to meet you someday. Hi, Mike, you're transitioning the role from an automotive appraiser, and you currently do not want to do the job forever because it's very repetitive, and that is why you stated, and I think it. So I get the ability of not wanting to do a job for a long period of time. Researching in AWS and working in the console, I wouldn't want to do that long either. You want to be a solutions architect, but you love working with the console. Is that contradiction? Is you don't see the skills? So yes, it is. Well, I mean, there's a couple of things. The first thing to think about, Smelly or the creator, and I hope I didn't get your name wrong or pronounce it wrong, is you would never be at the console anyway. And here's why you would never be at the console. It's too slow. So realistically speaking, for lots of reasons, we're going to have a DevOps engineer do an infrastructure as code script, or you might do one yourself, and here's the why. If you're at the console, and Billy Bob's at the console, and Joey's at the console, and Maria's at the console, and Nikolaus is the console, and Evangelos is the console, I promise you, you're all going to do the same thing a little different. We're going to have configuration drift, and we're going to have a nightmare. But if I come up with the standard infrastructure as code template and some landing zones and some guardrails, nobody will be able to create anything that's not going to be inside of spec, that's going to be out of spec from a security perspective, OS hardening perspective. So you'll never be able to touch the creator for the most part, even if you were an engineer. You'd be using the CLI or the infrastructure as code. Now, you're ultimately in the same position as a lot of us. A lot of us architects actually still like to be a little bit techy. And for those architects, what we do is you have your main job. You do your main job. You study to be better at your main job. And just like somebody that has music as a hobby, where they like to play music in their off time, you keep a couple of servers in your house with like, say, 64 cores each, and you build stuff for fun. You experiment for fun because you like it, but you keep that separated from your job. You could have your expensive architect job and your expensive architect skills, and what you do is a passion. It doesn't matter if you wants to be karate, which was my passion, and then many other martial arts. Great. If you wanted to be, building your own little things in your spare time, that's typically great. Why don't we offer scholarships to individuals who can't afford the architect programs, or set up a different type of payment plan, such as an income sharing agreement? So what we actually did is we took a course, and I'm being completely honest about it. We took a course. We knew if we were going to sell it in the America and the UK, we would charge about 30,000 US dollars for it because of all the business executive things that were there. And then, quite frankly, I looked at it and said, what is the least amount we can charge, and what would work in India and typically places like Nigeria, Cameroon, South Africa, and other parts of the world? Then we picked the lowest price we possibly could. We even came up with a non-live version that is substantially less for people that couldn't afford our primary training. And we basically charge our costs, so it's not like there's a lot of margin to do other things. As far as an income sharing agreement, they feel very horrible and morally unethical to me. And here's the reason. The companies that do these things, they take 10% of a person's income for years. That feels a lot like indentured servitude to me, and it feels very something that I really want to stay away from. It doesn't feel fair. So I try to charge as little as we can. We even came up with a non-live version to try to do so, but we want to leave people better. Now, for people that can't afford our main training programs, we do a lot of free things. For example, we've got a free cybersecurity fundamentals boot camp that we're actually doing, which you can sign up for right now. You may note that we have free certification training programs like the CCSP, the CISM, the CCNA, the AWS Solutions Architect Associate, the Azure Solutions Architect Expert, the Google Professional Cloud Architect, and the CCSK as well. So we do as much as we can for free, but we charge our costs. That's really the only thing we can do, is basically charge our costs. We just don't have a lot of room to do bigger things with what we charge, because we always considered India and Africa as our target, where lots of people would work in addition to what we have. All right. Well, if there are no more questions, let me mention a couple of things. So on Thursday, we have a How to Become a Security Architect webinar. And we will go over what we do as security architects, 100% of the skills you need as a security architect. You can ask me any questions, how to stand out, how to get hired. It'll be lots of fun because it'll be on Zoom. Ask me any questions you absolutely have. In addition to that, there are many free guides in the description of this video that will help you build your career, pass your career. Lots of time, effort, and professionals went into creating these guides to help you build your career. And to let you know. So I hope you actually join us for that. And I hope to see you on the webinar Thursday. Take care, everyone, and I will see so many of you soon.